to hear me sound like a conspiracy theorist? Well, here goes. But before I do that, I want to kind of hand you a caveat that will show you why it is that I'm really not being a conspiracy theorist. I'm going to tell you that the people that I'm talking about, and I'll talk about some particular people, are not necessarily doing things to make the stuff that I'm talking about happen. They're just happy to see it be that way, and they're happy to talk about it. That doesn't mean they're really doing anything. I don't really know whether they are or they're not, and I'm not willing to make a statement to that effect one way or the other. But I do want to talk today on the idea of pushing democracy on the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I'm your host. I'm Kurt, and today is Tuesday, the 5th of April of 2022. Welcome to everyone who's here on Rumble, the podcast, YouTube, BitChute, Cloud Hub, my Facebook page, which would be the Kurt's Religion and Politics page on Facebook, the Kurt's Religion and Politics group, that is kurtzreligionandpolitics.locals.com on Locals, and the minds.com and mynds.com group, which would be also Kurt's Religion and Politics on Minds, on Parler and Gab on Twitter, wherever else you happen to be seeing me today, catching me, whether it's listening or seeing or whatever it happens to be. Subject for today is pushing democracy, and I'm going to go through my notes to sort of start this process of discussing the idea of people who are, in fact, pushing democracy. So let me go ahead and do that. Have you ever noticed the insistence of people on the right side of the political aisle in the United States when they tell you America is not a democracy? They'll typically make it plain we're intended to be a republic. Some will term it a representative republic, and that's a reasonably good term, but I like straight republic better. There's a very important reason many of us are so prone to belabor that point. See, in a republic, you have a well-laid foundation of law on which an entity rests, but in a democracy, people can change how things work by virtue of a simple majority vote. I have a theory to why those who choose to try to couch the U.S. as a democracy instead of a republic do that. And frankly, it fits very nicely with their desire to move supposedly oppressive countries. And to be fair, some of them actually are basically dictatorial or at least highly authoritarian toward democracy as well. And all those two fit together very nicely, and let me go into it in a minute here. If you look at what the founders of the United States had to say about democracy, you begin to understand. I won't bother to look up the exact quote expressing the idea that democracies seldom last long and essentially commit suicide. They say murder themselves, but that's essentially committing suicide. The point is, democratic governments are invariably transitional from one type of authoritarianism to another. If instead you set a solid baseline of law and make it clear all actions of existing government, and frankly the people as well, must adhere to that law, you're doing something it's pretty hard to subvert. I say pretty hard as opposed to impossible. It's not impossible. In fact, it's happening here in the United States as far as I can tell. If you can convince people to ignore that base law and act as a democracy instead, you're well on the way to a transfer of power. What about countries with authoritarian governments? Well, if you want to do the transfer of power in them, you must first convince people to fall into a, quote, transitional state, end of quote. You can use anarchy, but that's messy and much harder to recover from. And by the way, it's a lot harder to sell a lot of folks on too. If instead you use democracy as the transitional form, it doesn't take nearly so long to recover under a new authoritarian leadership. And by the way, it convinces people that they're on the right track because they're moving towards what appears to be liberty, freedom, whatever you want to call it. Why are people who are pushing socialism or similar ideologies in the U.S. pushing democracy abroad? I think there's really a pretty simple answer to that question. They feel like we're already in a transitional state, but want to move us farther along that path here in the United States. For a nation that's already dealing with, say, a dictatorial regime, it's going to be awfully hard to break out of that government without getting the people on your side, or at least some good portion of them. Once you manage that, you're nearly home free. If you install a supposed democracy, and for many places, it's already an authoritarian regime you're pushing, and the rest is comparatively easy. Why are people pushing authoritarianism here? Supposed democracy abroad? I think you can see from what I've said to this point exactly why I believe that's the case. The reality is this. Democracy is never something that the leadership of the United States was interested in. They didn't ever want that. They wanted a republic in which there were certain things that limited the government so that the government could not do those things. And one of the things that they were trying to limit is people being able to quickly vote for things that they thought they might find beneficial, useful, or whatever. They wanted that to not happen in the United States. That is one of the things that they were trying to do. So if you see the idea that we are in a country which is in its own sort of odd sort of way authoritarian in its nature because it has this constitution and these baseline laws that it uses to do its work, then you realize that those people who are trying to get the system into another authoritarian state from the one that it's in feel a need to push it through democracy in order to achieve that. And again, you can achieve that through other ends like anarchy and so forth, but it's much easier to use democracy because democracy a lot of people see as having light at the end of the tunnel, and that is generally not true for anarchy, okay, for example. And it's certainly not true for most authoritarian regimes. It's just not. Anybody who knows very much of anything knows that that's the case. Sorry, I'm obsessing over the fact that my camera is a little off kilter in terms of its tripod at the moment. It'll be okay. I changed the camera without really thinking about it. But anyway, the point I'm making is this. The simple point is this. When you've got an entity that is authoritarian at the present moment, you need to move them to something else if you then want to push them back to an authoritarian regime under different leadership. If you have a regime that is, and that thing, it turns out, is democracy. If you have a regime that's a republic and that republic has base laws that you have to lay waste to, the only way many people can see to do that, or the best way maybe, is to create a democracy where none existed. I'm going to say this again. If you look at what the founders of the United States said about democracy, virtually none of them supported the idea of democracy. Virtually none of them. And I totally understand why when you look at what happens with democracies. They describe it in various ways. The John Birch Society, who I've heard people say bad things about, put it like this. They said, imagine that you've got a guy and it looks like he's killed somebody. I can't remember exactly what the crime was. So a posse rides out and they go to grab the guy, and they grab the guy and they decide that they're going to string him up on the nearest tree. And somebody rides up and says, you can't do that. He's got due process. He's got these various things that he can expect, and you can't do that. That's unreasonable. Now you've got a bunch of people who, if they're just allowed to vote on things, will probably vote to string the guy up. But you've got somebody who's saying that's not how our system works, and saying further, if you do that, you are breaking our laws and you will be held to account. Then suddenly the picture changes substantially. And this is one of the problems with democracy. So I would say that there are people out there who are trying to get authoritarian nations out of authoritarian situations with ulterior motives. They're not trying to actually keep those nations free. What they're trying to do is put them under leadership that they think would be more suited to what it is that they're trying to accomplish or achieve. I believe that that's what they're doing. You may say that I'm wrong. You can do that if you want. Again, I don't think that they're necessarily doing anything except sort of cheering it on. They may be doing more. I can't say for sure. I don't know, and therefore I don't choose to express any opinion on that. I don't see the sense in expressing an opinion on something that I don't have an answer to. All right, I need to go ahead and wrap things up. This has been the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I'm your host, I'm Kurt, and today is Tuesday, the 5th of April of 2022. That means tomorrow will be that middle of the work week, according to most folks who work that Monday through Friday. It'll be Wednesday, the 6th of April of 2022. Thank you for everyone who's been here on Rumble, on the podcast, on YouTube, on BitChute, on locals.com, on CloudHub, on Facebook, my Facebook page. That will be the Kurt's Religion and Politics page on Facebook, on kurtzreligionandpolitics.locals.com, on Minds, MINDS.com, on the Kurt's Religion and Politics group there, on Parler, on Gab, on Twitter, or wherever else you happen to be picking me up today. Subject for today has been pushing democracy. Hope you are doing well. Tomorrow's subject is levels of sin, and I'm addressing something that I've heard somebody else talk about that I really don't think they understand entirely what they're saying if you look at things from a biblical perspective. Okay, that having been said, I hope you are doing well today. Hope everything is going well for you, and hopefully we'll see you again on Wednesday's edition of the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. The speaker on this edition of the Daily Summation is Kurt Schubert. This podcast was created on Tuesday, the 5th of April of 2022. The Daily Summation is created for Kurt's Religion and Politics. Thanks for watching today's edition of the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. Don't forget to come back tomorrow to check out the next one. Remember, on various platforms, primarily Rumble, YouTube, BitChute, and CloudHub, and the audio podcast, you can subscribe to my content. For the audio podcast, you probably want to use Apple, Google, or Spotify. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify. In order to find me on those platforms, you can go to the Kurt's Religion and Politics channels on Rumble, YouTube, BitChute, and CloudHub. You can also get to my content on Facebook by finding the Kurt's Religion and Politics page there. Minds, MINDS.com, where you will find me at the Kurt's Religion and Politics group, and Kurt's Religion and Politics.locals.com as well. You can look there. I post my daily video on various social media sites, really only about 3, Parler, Gab, and Twitter at present. I am at KP Schubert on each of them, and you can find me under them, and you can find the videos under me. You should be able to find my podcasts on Google and Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It's also on podcasts.kpschubert.com. That's podcasts with an S, .kpschubert.com. If you're looking for me on various of the podcast sites, you probably want to search Kurt's Religion and Politics, not the Daily Summation. Keep in mind, you can subscribe to my content on various places that I put it. All constructive feedback is welcome. You can like, dislike, add a rumble, or give whatever feedback is available on any of the platforms that you can do such things. You can also add a comment on what I put there. Unless you're advertising or doing something that I believe will harm others, I'll leave your comments out there even if I don't agree with or understand them. I will try to let you know I've seen them when possible and may reply if I feel it's reasonable, appropriate, and possible, of course. Thanks again for viewing this edition of the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. Don't forget to come back again for tomorrow's